I want to see what the difference is between fermenting sourdough at my room temperature, 25 degrees Celsius, and in my chamber at 30 degrees Celsius, which is a temperature that some of you have told me that you've been struggling with. Now I'm going to make two separate doughs in exactly the same way. The only differences will be the temperature that they're kept at and any time adjustments that I need to make to compensate for that temperature difference. I want to see the difference in the fermentation times and the way that the dough handles. And the ultimate goal is to try to produce two very similar loaves. So if you're working at those higher temperatures, I hope this helps you out. So two doughs, 850 grams each at 70% hydration. Note, the ingredients for the room temperature dough have been sitting at room temperature, which is 25 degrees Celsius. And the ingredients for the 30 degree dough, the 30 Celsius dough, have been kept in the proofing chamber at 30 degrees. That ensures that both doughs are going to be mixed to the correct temperatures. So in goes 295 grams of water and 102 grams of starter. That's followed by a quick stir. In goes 444 grams of strong white bread flour. This has got a protein content of 13%. 10 grams of sea salt gets sprinkled on the top. Everything is mixed together with a spoon, and then I get my hand involved just to bring everything together into a rough dough. I want to make sure there are no dry pockets or spots of flour. Both are covered. One will sit at room temperature and the other will sit in my proofing chamber at 30 degrees Celsius. And that is where they will stay whenever I'm not working with them. Now, after 15 minutes, both doughs get a 1 minute knead just to make sure everything is well mixed. I'm going to remove 100 grams of dough from each batch to use as a control piece. I'll pop it into a jar, mark the outside with a marker, and now I can see how much that dough increases in size. And I want to see an increase of 75% in both doughs during the fermentation. I only use this control dough method if I'm experimenting. I never ever do this when I bake normally. And there are some good reasons why. I'm not going to bang on about why in this video, but if you want to know more about my tricky kind of relationship with this method, you can read the blog, which I'll link to down in the video description. Now both doughs are shaped. I'm going to place them back into their bowls. I'm going to cover them and they're both going to sit back at their respective temperatures. Right, so 30 minutes after the kneading, they're going to get their first stretch or lamination. No difference in smell, and there doesn't appear to be any difference in the dough until I stretch them. That 30 Celsius dough is more like a 75% hydration. It's stickier and it tears really easily compared to that room temperature dough. So they'll go back into their bowls, get covered and sit again for 30 minutes. So now we'll do this second set of laminating. And now that dough's had a little bit of time to build some strength, I can actually feel the difference in the extensibility. The 30 Celsius dough stretches a lot easier. It really does feel like it's a higher hydration. So both doughs get shaped again, placed back into their bowls, and they're going to sit covered at their respective temperatures until their control doughs have increased by 75% of their original volume. Right, so I started that room temperature dough first this morning, so that's the one that's up first to shape. It's easy to handle, it's not sticky, nicely fermented and holds its volume. Now this took 6.5 hours to ferment, and after a quick bath in rice flour, it's going to go into its basket. This is the 30 Celsius dough. The same thing, it feels like a higher hydration. It's a lot more stretchy, it's a lot more jiggly, it's nicely fermented, but it definitely isn't as stiff as the room temperature dough. This dough only took 5 hours to ferment. It's beaten the other dough by a whole hour and a half. Now that thermometer has got nothing to do with this video. I'm using it to record temperature drops for the calculator. If you want to know more about that, there'll be a link in the video description. So both doughs are going to get covered and they're going to sit at their respective temperatures to prove in their baskets. So the room temperature dough sat covered in the basket for 2 hours to prove and will now go into the fridge overnight for 18 hours. And this is that 30 Celsius dough. It was proved for 1 hour and 30 minutes before I decided to pop it in the fridge. I got a bit nervous. As this dough is warmer, it's going to take longer for that temperature to drop in the fridge. and I was worried that it might overprove. So here we are 18 hours later and it's bake time. Here's that 30 Celsius dough and you can see that the top has caved in slightly, and the warmer temperature of the dough has caused quite a bit of condensation, to be fair, to sit on top, making that dough quite damp. But the room temperature dough is nice, it's dry on the top and the shape has held really well during the proof in the basket. Now both doughs are going to get exactly the same treatment. They're going to be baked on a baking stone that's been preheated to 220 degrees Celsius or 430 degrees Fahrenheit. They'll bake for 20 minutes covered and then 25 minutes uncovered. Right, let's get that room temperature dough scored and baked first. It's exactly where I want it to be. It's nicely proved, it sits down nicely on the peel, scores easily, so straight into the oven it goes. But here's that 30 Celsius dough and you can actually see that the basket is wet from the condensation. I'm going to use a touch more flour on this one just to stop it sticking to the peel. The top has definitely dropped in and it lays flat as soon as it hits the peel. The lamb, thanks again Wire Monkey, isn't as easy to pull through this dough. Now at this point I really was convinced that that 30 Celsius dough was going to be an absolute disaster. I thought I had completely messed up the timings when I proved it in the basket. So let's have a little look. Here's my room temperature loaf out of the oven. And here's that 30 Celsius dough I was a bit worried about. I can tell you I breathed a huge sigh of relief when this one came out of the oven. And I've got to say that straight out of the box, they look pretty similar. And I've got to say I'm quite chuffed about that. The room temperature loaf is plump, it sprung nicely, produced a nice ear and baked kind of to my liking all the way around. A couple of oversized pockets on the crumb, but on the whole, a really well baked loaf. Pretty chuffed with that. That 30 Celsius loaf isn't quite as plump, but I kind of like that lower profile. Jumped up in the oven, producing a nice ear and good colour on the crust, a really nice crumb. And there I was, thinking it was going to be a complete and utter disaster. So what did I kind of learn from all of this? Well, even if you follow exactly the same recipe and use exactly the same ingredients, but work at different temperatures, your dough will probably handle differently. Now the real surprise for me was how that 30-degree dough felt like it was a 75% hydration. So if you've been following a recipe exactly, but your dough is behaving completely differently, temperature could well be at play. Don't be afraid of dialing down the hydration slightly. The dough is going to ferment a lot quicker at warmer temperatures. We probably all know that, so just keep an eye on it. Be prepared to reduce the time if needed. That 30-degree dough bulk fermented a whole hour and a half quicker and went half an hour quicker during the proving stage. And at higher temperatures, the dough's got more chance of overproofing in the fridge. Remember that one, because it takes a lot longer for the dough temperature to drop. So if it's warm, consider cutting the proving time at ambient temperature right back or putting the dough directly in the fridge after shaping. Now I want to know what you've experienced if you've been working at hotter temperatures or warmer temperatures and what you thought about the differences between these doughs and the final loaves. Now that scoring video will be coming soon, but I'm going to take a couple of weeks off of testing and experimenting, so maybe a recipe next week. Hang tight, see what else I learned by watching this video here. A huge thank you for watching. See you again very soon. Stay tuned.